Cool. All right, so before I get started, I want to welcome you all, of course. This is an awesome event, especially here in Brisbane. It's probably the best in Australia. Before I get started, I've heard that the Sunny's photo is quite popular now at DDD, so I just want to invite you to join me on the Sunny's photo. If you got Sunny's there. Have you? Are you guys ready? 3, 2, 1. Cool, now I can get started. Cool, so now I have a container. What now? So this talk is all about what you do once you have a container, right? I'm not gonna show you like how to create complex containers or anything like that. It's just what you do next, okay? My name is Thiago Passos. I'm a solution architect at SSW. This is my Twitter handle, where I'm gonna post that photo. There's my blog, if you wanna come and have a look. Okay, so who here has a container? All right, so quarter of the room. Who here is a .NET developer? All right, I was expecting that. That's good. So for you guys who are .NET developer with no container, I'm gonna show you in 4 slides how to create your very first container. So just we are in the same page, right? So if you've got Visual Studio 2017, you're gonna find this little flag here called Enable Docker Support. And with that, you're gonna find this Docker file in your project, which is pretty much the definition of your image, your container image, right? And with that also you can build, run, and even debug within the container, which is pretty awesome. And once you do that, you can go to your console and write Docker image, and you're gonna find your image there. So hooray, you now have a container, right? So for today's agenda, I'm gonna talk about the container lifecycle. I'm gonna talk about the registry. I'm gonna touch briefly on the continuous integration regarding containers. And the biggest part of the talk is going to be around orchestration. So who here has heard about orchestration? All right, so I'm expecting today to shed some light on the orchestration story. And I hope you can go home today and start playing with containers, with orchestration, right? OK, so let's get started with the container lifecycle and how that changed comparing to your application lifecycle now, OK? First, the basics. So you've got a host. Here I'm using Linux boxes just because I'm doing .NET Core, so it's cross-platform and all. So you're going to have your Git repository where you're going to have your Docker file, that one that I showed you in the beginning of the talk. And as you progress with your development, you're going to generate the image and push your image to a registry, okay? And on the other side, in some other environment, dev, pre-prod, prod, whatever, you're going to pull that image and run. So that's as simple as that. That's the basics. OK, and when you make changes, how does that work? So I'm just going to take a step back and just come a few slides backwards. You can see here on the right-hand side the size of the images. So they are fairly big for an application, right? And these are only the small ones. So if you're looking for a Windows container, you're looking for gigabytes instead of megabytes. All right? So what happens is, every time I make a change, if I need to push the whole image, that's going to be pretty expensive bandwidth-wise, right? Especially if you are like tethering from your phone or anything. So if you're in a cafe and you need to push a new change, you're screwed if you have to push the whole image, right? But hopefully that's not how it works, right? So the registry is smart enough to split your image in several parts and compare that in a binary level. So when you push a new change, it actually pushes only the delta of that image, which is pretty cool. And the same way it works on the other side. So in the other environment, it's going to pull that delta of the image, and it's going to run. So that's why the deployment is so quick with containers. OK, so here's an example of me trying to push an image that I already have in my registry. So you can see here that all the layers are exactly the same, so it didn't push anything. So that was probably silly of me trying to push the same image. But the second one, you see that only the delta was pushed. So that's a new version of the image, and just the delta was pushed. All the rest was already there. And the same applies when you have 2 images So let's say you have two applications, two separate applications using the .NET Core 2.0 base image. When you push the first one, you're going to push the whole image. When you try to push the second one, it's going to realize that that base image is already in your registry, so it's not going to push the second image all again. It's just going to push that delta. Does that make sense? Cool. All right, so what is the container registry? So I've talked a lot about the container registry, but what is it? So basically, it's just like a NuGet server, right? So who he's using NuGet? 100%, I would suppose, even though a few people didn't raise their hands. Yeah, so it's pretty much like a repository for your images, okay? And it's highly scalable, and its main purpose is to distribute your image in a reliable way, okay? But how do you push your image to a registry? And that was the first roadblock I had when I first started with containers, because I looked at a registry the same way I look into a Git repository, right? So you configure your remote repository the first time, and then you just push, and that's it. But in a registry, that's quite different. Every time you push, you actually have to tell where you're going to push to. So that's basically how it works. First, you log into your Docker registry. If it's a private registry, then you have to set the registry URL. If you're using the Docker Hub, which is the default registry from Docker, you don't need to pass any URL. You just do Docker login and enter your credential for Docker Hub. In this case, I'm using my private registry. So it looks like that. And then you have to tag that image, right? The image that you have in your host. You have to tag prefixing with the URL of your registry. If you're using Docker Hub, it's your username for Docker. And then you suffix with the version of your image. So for me, it's going to look something like that. And the next thing and last is just push, okay? And you're going to use the tagged image name, okay? So that's pretty much it. So after you do these steps, your image is there in the registry and it's ready to be used, okay? Does that make sense? Cool. All right, continuous integration. Who here is using any sort of continuous integration tool? All right, okay, so that's good, because I don't have any slides for continuous integration. Because you don't need to change a lot in your continuous integration, right? So the only thing you need to do is push the result of your build to your registry, and off you go, right? I'm going to touch about the continuous integration in the orchestration itself. But yeah, you don't need to change your pipeline that much. It's just using that section in the registry, all right? Cool, so container orchestration. So that's going to be a big story. But first, why would you use an orchestration tool? And in this section here, I'm going to try to convince you to start using an orchestration tool, right? And I'm going to show you some features and some smarts of the orchestration tool, so you're convinced to get started. All right, so first, you don't have no server management, okay? Especially if you're going to go to a hosted environment like Azure, AWS, Google Cloud Services. You basically say, hey, give me a cluster, and off you go. So you're ready to go with a bunch of VMs all configured for you, all right? And that's how a cluster looks like. In this case, I'm using the official Kubernetes cluster image, but that's going to apply to any of the orchestration tool you're going to use, right? So you've got a master in the middle, which is going to be responsible for all the smarts within your cluster, like load balancing, scaling, self-healing, all that in your master. And the rest is just going to be like agents, like dummy agents that are responsible for running your containerized application. Okay, I'm going to come back to the cluster later. But the next thing is self-discovery. So when I first started with containers and orchestration is, specifically, I didn't understand the concept, right? So you deploy your container, and it's going to say, hey, I'm here, just use me. It didn't get into my mind. But then I had a look further, and it's actually pretty simple, right? So you've got at the top there, you have the service B and service A at the bottom. And the service is basically a way to expose your application either internally or externally. Okay, does that make sense? All right. In the bottom there, I only have one one instance of my application. At the top, I've got 3 instances. So this service is going to work as a load balancer as well. So it's going to take turns on who's going to run that request. Okay? Make sense so far? So it makes sense how the self-discovery works? Nah, I hope not. Because yeah, it doesn't make sense for me this way. But now it's going to make sense, right? So when you deploy your service, what you're going to say is, hey, use this label selector, right? And this label selector is going to say, get anything in my cluster that has this label. If anything that you find has this label, just bring to my service. Okay? Now it's going to make more sense, because when you deploy your application, you're going to say, hey, that's the label for this application. Okay? So app A. The service A is expecting anything with a app A label, and it's going to bring automatically to the service. Okay, so if you deploy that service the first time, that application the first time, the service is going to automatically pick that application and put under the service. Okay, so that was a self-discovery. The scaling. So scaling in orchestration works very, very nice, and it's going to use some of the load balancing functionalities. But that's how it works. It can work either manually, so you can just tell your orchestration to bump up the number of instances, or you can monitor either the CPU usage or memory usage, and then scale automatically, right? In the demo, I'm going to show you the manual way to do it, but you can just set up that automatically as well. So basically, I'm going to go to my deployment. I've got my service. I showed you how the service works. So I'm going to go to my deployment and say, hey, I want now 4 instances of that application, right? And the deployment is going to create 4 instances, and the service is going to automatically pick up if it's in the same node or not. So each of these boxes there, they are different VMs. So they're in different areas even. So the orchestration tool is going to pick up all the instances of the application. And you can either scale up and down as you want. And I'm going to demo that later on. OK, so the 0 downtime deployment. So who here has a 1-minute downtime deployment? That's not many. Who here has a 5 minutes downtime deployment? Not many either. Who here has half an hour? 1 hour plus? OK, not many. So you have what, a week? Or you don't care? Or you just don't care about the 0 downtime deployment, right? You just go to production. Yeah, you don't deploy. You go to production and change it in production, right? You can do that as well. OK. So no deployment at all. Cool. All right. So that's how I'm gonna prove that in the demo as well. But that's how the 0 downtime deployment works in an orchestration tool. So you wouldn't expect when you deploy to bring the whole service down and bring back up when it's done, right? What you do is you go to the deployment and say, hey, I've got a new version of this image. Just update this image. So that's how it works. So it's going to create a new instance with the new version. And as soon as it's up and running and available, it's going to delete the other one. And it's going to do that one by one until everything is up to date. Okay? This way, you have 0 downtime deployment. Because at any point in time, you're going to have at least one container, one instance available for you. Does that make sense? Cool. So if you don't care about the 0 downtime deployment, no, sorry. I'm not going to go there. Yeah.
Dumb question. What if you're getting smashed and is it do one at a time? Update?
Yeah, it's going to, yeah.
Like balance just pointed to the old ones until...
Yeah, so it's going to bring in a new version. As soon as it's available, it's going to bring to the load balancer.
So the load balancer is the new version only? Until...
No, it's going to, during the deployment, you're going to find some time that you're going to have the new version and the old version at the same time. Yeah, yeah.
At a point in time.
Yeah. OK, self-healing. This name for me was a bit tricky when I first saw that, because I thought, all right, so if your container starts playing up, it's just going to try to fix the container. That's not how it works. So the way that self-healing works is your application in general, right? So it's going to try to make your application as healthy as possible. And that means if your container starts playing up, it's going to kill that container and bring another one up. So you expect just to have multiple instances of the application running at any point in time. So if one dies, you're going to kill and bring another one up. Okay? So that's basically how it works. So let's see that we have 3 agents here, and 1 dies for any reason, right? So if a region in whatever in Europe dies for some reason, you have now 2 agents instead of 3, and one of the containers was there, right? So how the orchestration fix that? So it basically creates another instance somewhere available, right? And the same happens if the container dies by itself, right? So it's not only about the node, but the container itself. So if it dies, it brings another one up. And I'm going to demo that today. OK, so I think at this point, you might be thinking, all right, so this is awesome, but which orchestration tool should I use? If you go to Google now and search for an orchestration tool, you're going to find a bunch of them, right? And these are only the top 5 that I found, right? So we've got the Service Fabric from Microsoft, Kubernetes originally from Google, Mesosphere, Docker Swarm from Docker, and Cloud Foundry. So if you didn't know anything about orchestration, and you know a little bit about containers, you know that the best or the most used tool, container engine is Docker, right? So it's almost used interchangeably. Docker and container, they are pretty much the same thing now. So you think, all right, so I'm going to use an orchestration tool. It might make sense that I should go to Docker Swarm, right? Because Docker is the most well-known Docker engine. OK, so I'm kind of sold. I'm going to go to Docker Swarm. So the first thing anyone would do is go to the website and check how to get started. OK, so I'm going to go to docker.com and check. All right, so it's a bit odd. That's the first page of docker.com, right? So they're offering Kubernetes, which is quite odd, all right? So yeah, I don't know if I'm going to go to Docker Swarm now. So I'm going to go to Microsoft now and check, right? I don't know. Maybe they've got a Service Fabric, might be the best one, let's say. And I go there. They've got this stuff called Azure Container Service, and it's been there for a while. And now they are introducing AKS, which implies Azure Kubernetes Service. Okay, so they're pushing Kubernetes very hard. And I also have some inside knowledge that they are really pushing very hard. Okay, so it makes sense to go Docker, all right, to go Kubernetes. Okay, so I did a bit of research, and yeah, Kubernetes has one. So there is no doubt. So yeah, I'm going to go Kubernetes, and that's it. All right, so how do you create your cluster? All right, so there are a few ways to create your cluster. I'm going to show you a very easy way, and I'm going to mention the hard way. So if you want to go the hard way, up to you. It would be fun, but might be hard. All right, so the easy way is that. So I've got the Azure CLI installed. I'm going to use the Azure Kubernetes service. So I'm going to create my resource group. So who here is familiar with Azure? All right, so a resource group is just basically a group of resources that they are built together and whatever. So as soon as you're not using that resource group anymore, you can just kill, and you're not going to be charged for that at all. So I'm going to create my resource group. So I'm going to name AKS RG. I'm going to use the East US location because Kubernetes is not available in every region, just a few. But anyway, it's working fine. And then I'm going to create my cluster. And that's basically it. With a single command, you've got a cluster, right? So AKS create, I'm going to name the resource group and the name of my cluster. And that's it. Off I go, right? So the only thing that I need to do next to start playing with Kubernetes is bring my credentials to Kubernetes locally, my certs and stuff. And that's just with a single command as well. And now I can start playing with the Kubernetes CLI and all that locally. Okay? Is that easy? Cool. All right, so I'm going to just run a Kubernetes command here, which basically brings all the nodes available in my cluster, including the master. So that's a kube control get nodes. That's just a simple command. And the other one I'm going to use here is I'm gonna do a AKS browse, which is gonna launch the dashboard locally. So it's gonna create a proxy, so I can access the cluster locally, and I can start playing with that. Okay, I'm gonna demo that later on, but that's basically how it works. Okay, so that's the easy way. You can always go the hard way, and sometimes I go the hard way. All right, so before we go to the hard way, so that's how the dashboard looks like. I'm gonna show you that a bit later. But again, what I said, you can go the hard way. So Scott Hanselman created a blog post, how to create a Kubernetes cluster with a bunch of Raspberry Pis. So if you have time, I don't have time. I have 2 kids and another one on the way, so pretty busy right now. But yeah, it sounds very fun. Okay, so a bit of demo now. All right. So as I said, I've got my dashboard here. Okay, and the first demo I'm going to do, I'm going to deploy a simple application to my container, to my cluster, right? So I'm going to bring this container in the Docker Hub, and this is a simple container just to transform HTML into PDF, which is something that we do all the time for any clients. So I'm just going to copy the image here, the image name. I'm going to go to my dashboard. I'm going to create. So all that I'm doing manually. All right, so let's just take a step back here. I have to start the proxy, which is pretty much that AKS browse that I showed you before. It's going to create a proxy, and I can use that locally. Okay, so if I refresh here, that should work now. Okay, so it's working. So I can go and create. I'm going to give the application a name. I'm going to call it PDF, so I can use on any other application within my cluster. I'm going to give it the image that I just copied. I'm going to have only one pod, only one instance of the application. And I'm going to expose that externally through port 80. Okay, does that make sense, what I'm doing right now? So it's just going to deploy that image. It's going to run that image in my cluster, and it's going to expose through port 80. Too easy? All right. So I'm going to deploy that. That's going to take a few minutes to deploy. And while this is happening, I just want to show you quickly. If I go to my overview here, I've got already an application called DDD Brisbane dev. Okay, so that's the one. It's probably a bit hard to. Can you guys see that at the back? Cool. All right. So I've got this service here, which is exposing my application, right? So the service is the way to expose your application. And it's got this IP address already. So if I click there, it's a very simple .NET Core 2.0 API, which is just returning a bunch of values. Right? So that's the very vanilla API that you just file a new project. That's what you get. Okay? And what I want to do here is I want to deploy a new version of that container. And what I'm going to show you here is the container continuous integration story. I'm using Circle CI here just because it's free and I can share these steps with you. Who here has heard about Circle CI at all? All right, so it's pretty cool and it's free, so you can start using today if you want. All right, so I'm going to make a change here. So I've got my API here, and I'm going to say DDD Brisbane is awesome. All right, so I'm going to make a change. And that's connected to my GitHub repository. So I'm just going to push that and push. OK. Also, Circle CI is already connected to my GitHub repository. And at some point, it's going to pick up here, and it's going to start building my application. OK? All right, so it's queued there. All right, so it's going to spin up the environment. It's going to get the latest version, build, and push my image to the registry. All right, so that's the plan that we're trying to achieve here. But before we get there, I just want to show you here. All right, so let me just go back to the portal here. Cool. All right, I've got this resource group called Docker and my registry called Thiago at azure.cr.io. And I've got my repositories here with the DDD Brisbane. So you can see here in Circle CI, the version is now 2.0. All right. So it's publishing my .NET application. It's still running. Is it 2.0? All right, it's actually 15. I don't know why it was showing 2.0 here. Anyway, that's something else. Anyway, the version is 15, so I've got the latest version I've got in my repository right now. It's 14, so I'm expecting the 15 to come up, right? So as soon as this is done, which should finish quite soon, so it's building my Docker image and it's pushing. All right, so what I want to show you here is two things. One is how to deploy, okay, which you can do via the command line, but you can actually automate that if you want. I'm not going to show you how to automate today, but you can automate that via your Circle CI or any continuous integration tool. And also what I want to show you is the zero downtime deployment. Okay, so it finished building and the new version should come up here. All right, so we've got version 15 here. All good? Okay, so let's have some fun. All right. Okay, I've got two command lines here. And I've got that just because I want to show you something. All right, I'm going to go to kube control, and what I want to get is all the deployments, which is going to list all the deployments I have in my cluster right now. Okay. And while this is getting, it shouldn't take long. Can you all see that? Is that all right? Yep, cool. All right, so I've got one deployment called DDD Brisbane Dev with two instances of my application, right? And they're all current, they're all up to date, and they're all available. Okay. What I want to do actually is I'm gonna use the same command, but what I'm gonna add is this watch flag here, which is gonna keep watching the deployment. So if anything changes, it's gonna replicate and it's gonna show the change being made. All right. So I'm gonna keep this running so you can see that happening automatically. Okay. All right. All right, so kube control, and I'm going to set the image, all right? I'm going to set the image for that deployment. So the deployment is deployment DDD Brisbane Dev, okay? And the image I'm going to update is the DDD Brisbane, okay? So that's the name of my application. It's not the name of the image. And I'm going to set the image for this application. And the image name is Thiago at azure.cr.io, DDD Brisbane, version 1.0.15. Okay? All right, so as soon as I do that, you're going to see some numbers changing here. Okay? That's what it's supposed to happen. All right. So you can see here on the left-hand side that the desired number didn't change because that's the ideal scenario, to have two available instance of the application, right? But you saw that it went from 2 here to 1. Right, so 2 it didn't even get that. So 2 here to 1. So 1 was up to date, and the other one wasn't, because the deployment was so quick that it didn't even get the 0 up to date. But all of them were available at any point in time. Okay, so at no point in time, we had 0 available. So at any point, 1 was there to respond to any request. Okay, so that's there. So we should be good to go. If we go to the browser now and update that URL, I should get the latest version, which is working fine. Cool. All right, so the next thing I want to show you is the self-healing. So let's go to the dashboard here. All right. I'm gonna show you all the replications of my application. So I've got 2 instances of the DDD Brisbane and one of the PDF. And what I want to show you is I just want to be naughty and I want to kill one of the instances to see how the cluster behaves. Okay, so you can see that we have 2 here. What I'm going to do is click here and delete. So let's see how it's going to behave. So delete. Yeah, just delete that. And you see that happening. All right. So it killed one. So you went from 2 current to 1 because you just deleted one, and automatically picked up and started deploying another one, and you back to happy days. Okay. Cool. All right. So what if you want to scale that? All right. As I said, you can do that automatically, but if I want to do manually here, I can basically scale that deployment, and I can say, all right, so give me 10 replicas now. All right. So when I do that, it's just gonna start spinning up a bunch of instances of that same application. Okay, so you can see that happening on the left-hand side here. All right, so it went from 2 to 10, and gradually is gonna be available because the deployment itself is very, very quick, but it's just making available, right? It's warming up all the instances and it's bringing to life. And I can do the same to scale back down, although the scale back down is much quicker because it's just scaling containers. Okay? Cool. So the last thing for this demo is getting back to the first thing I showed you. So I showed you that I deployed an instance of the application for the PDF, right? So let me see if the service is up and running. Okay, so the service is available. It created the external IP address so I can start using. If I wanted to use that right now from any external application, I could. But the way I'm going to do that is within the cluster, right? I want the DDD Brisbane application to talk to that PDF application and to generate a PDF for me, right? So what I did was I went to my DDD Brisbane application and I created an endpoint. So let me just open that up here. So that's already there. I created an endpoint to start this PDF client, send a HTML to that client, and bring back and download that PDF. Okay? Simple as that. But how I configure that? So the way I configured, and that's how you talk between containers, between applications, right? You don't need to set up any configuration in your container itself. So the old way that deployment worked was you deploy your application and you change any config files, right? It's not the way it's going to work for containers. The container is going to be immutable. So you're not going to change the containers. You're going to change outside, right? So the PDF here is going to be always going to be PDF, right? Even if the external IP address is different. So the internal one, the internal DNS, is going to be PDF. All right, so if I do that now, so I'm going to go to my application and I'm just /PDF. So if everything works well, I should prompt to download a PDF file, and that should just work. All right, so I've got a new file here coming up. I'm just going to save that. I'm going to replace whatever I have there. And there you go. I've got my PDF, so it worked fine. Right? So that's how you connect between applications in your cluster. Okay, I think that's all I had for this demo. So let's get back here. All right, so any questions so far?
How did you get the PDF to resolve internally inside those containers?
The PDF to
the PDF DNS entry.
So when I created the application, I said the name of the application was PDF. So that name is going to be the name of the DNS entry for that application. Oh. All right? But that's in the service. So in the UI, that's how you do it. But what you're going to do is actually via script. When you create a service, that's the name you're going to give. All right? Yep.
So what if you are installing a new version of the application and some of the pods are hosting the application, some of the pods are hosting web APIs, and then you have a breaking change in schema or API breaking changes? What would be the case?
Yeah, you can do that via tags and via different services. So you can have that's the beauty about the container orchestration. You can have multiple versions of the same application running, and you can just serve them differently. So when you serve, you can set the version you're looking for, and then you bring that back. Yeah. All right. So what if you don't want an orchestration, right? It might be cases that I've got a container, I just want to run it. All right. You can, but you're gonna lose a bunch of stuff, and that's the whole stuff you're gonna lose, right? But you can still do it, and people still do it, right? If you're in Azure, you can go to that registry that I just showed you. You can go to your repository, and you can just create an instance. So it's gonna run that instance in Azure. And when you do that, you're just gonna name that container name, and you're gonna expose that to the pod you wanna expose, and off you go, right? So you've got your container running in the cloud, right? So that's very simple, but you then lose everything for the cluster, right? So you start need to configure your container inside the container itself, so you can talk to any of the external resources. All right, so today we covered how the container lifecycle works, a bit of the registry. We touched briefly on the continuous integration. I'm gonna share all that via Twitter if you wanna get a hold on both the slide deck and the source code. And we also had a look on how to create your container orchestration the easy way and the hard way. Thank you very much.